Hey, what's up, guys? We're back again with another video. Today, we are going to be talking about the other C tier dungeon that I ranked in my tier list, which will be Spires of Ascension. Spires of Ascension is basically this Bastion dungeon, which is like very light and air themed, where you jump from platform to platform trying to defeat the bosses in a timely manner. And that's basically the whole gimmick behind Spires of Ascension. So with that gimmick being said, let's talk about the dungeon as a whole. Of course, we're going to start with the upsides of the dungeon. And the first major upside that I feel about this dungeon is that count is designed incredibly well to where you don't go over substantially on how much count is required to be able to fulfill the need in this dungeon, just by taking a linear route through the dungeon. This is due to a couple of factors. One of which being the fact that you're able to decide your routes in terms of like if you want to go to the left side or if you want to go to the right side. And then in addition to that, there are some packs that are actually just skippable without the use of like Shroud or Meld or Death Running or anything like that. So you're actually able to skip some of the trash mobs with just normal people, like just abilities, and you just run around them in order to be able to fulfill your trash count needs. And that, I feel like, it just makes for a great dungeon in terms of if you're deciding where you're going to get your count, if you're able to actually skip some of the trash just by walking past it and not dealing with it, and then you're still going to be slightly under count, so you have to pull something off to the side. That's just a great choice to make a dungeon well designed in terms of how the count experience is going to be. So with that said, I talked about the options for having multiple sides that you can go to. You can either pick the left side or the right side after the first boss. I think that is actually just a great upside to the Spires of Ascension as well. The multiple opportunities for what sides to go and then what trash mobs to fight, varying just a little bit depending on the side that you're going to end up going on, is incredibly nice. I think right now most of the metagame has a lot of people going to the right side, but I think that just the opportunity to be able to select if you want to go right or left depending on how much count you want, what mobs you feel like are a little bit more beneficial for your party to fight, and just so on and so forth. Those kind of things are absolutely phenomenal for a dungeon, because a lot of the things that make Mythic Plus so fun and so unique are the strategy and intricacies behind like where you're going, how you're pathing, what you're going to be doing inside of the dungeon, and giving the players more control and more opportunities to make their own path, to decide their own fate with what mobs they're pulling. That kind of thing is always going to be for the better. The third and final upside that I have for Spires of Ascension is that the dungeon just looks sick. Aesthetically, this is probably one of the most aesthetically pleasing dungeons. They really honed in the artwork of Bastion and turned it into something that is like you feel like you're battling a bunch of flying mobs in the air over Bastion, and like doing all these things where you're jumping from platform to platform, getting picked up by the Valkyr, and like really sticking it to all the flying people of Bastion. So yeah, just in terms of like the artwork and the raw aesthetics of the dungeon, I really think Spires of Ascension is very pleasing on that front, and I think it ends up looking like one of the best dungeons in terms of just visuals. So with all those upsides that I actually had for Spires of Ascension, I think that the biggest downside that I had for it, and ultimately the reason that it did end up getting a C tier, is that the trash is quite difficult to deal with, especially without voice being present. I've been playing in a lot of groups that have voice comms for a lot of our stuff, but even thus, I have also done a couple of runs of this dungeon where I'm not in voice, and coordinating kicks on the amount of trash bombs that you end up having to kick rotationally in this dungeon is very challenging. If you guys remember Shrine of the Storm, it feels very similar to that, where you have a couple of things that are like mandatory kicks, and then you have a couple things that are off to the side that are going to be doing just insane group-wide damage, and you have to allocate like double melee to one mob, and then you have to allocate like just infrequent kicks to the other stuff. And having that set up in advance and making sure that you have coordinated stops on everything, or coordinated AoE stuns, or just regular CCs, that's very important. And I feel like this dungeon is not very pug friendly because of that, just due to the amount of like kicks and stops and interrupts and everything that you have to be able to deal with inside of this dungeon. I worry that this dungeon has gone from too far in the direction of like, okay, occasionally interrupt rotations on mobs are fine, but whenever they become like one of the only mechanics in the dungeon, that becomes incredibly daunting, and that's where I feel like Spires of Ascension has landed. On top of that, there are a lot of mobs that like dash around and just like leave trails and shit like that, which makes melee incredibly frustrating to be able to play too. Their uptime is being severed pretty substantially by these mobs that are either like jumping into the sky and then like leaping and crashing down, or they're literally flying 20 yards in one direction or not. And that as a melee player is also just super, super annoying. So I think that this trash really lent itself to becoming too tedious, and that's why it ended up getting the ranking that it ended up getting, because the trash just had so many drawbacks in terms of how obnoxious it could potentially be. So for a few other downsides that I had for this dungeon that weren't as severe, the first one is the jumping from platform to platform has some novelty, but it does start to feel old kind of quick. I feel like just sitting through the AFK nature of the, you have to like wait for the platform to finish, and then like the RP to start, the Valkyr activates, then you click the Valkyr comes and picks you up, and then she carries you across, drops you on the next platform, and then you begin pulling again. I feel like that, like the downtime, which is like 20 to 30 seconds, does really feel kind of annoying. And just the thought of sitting there AFK watching your timer tick down, knowing that there's no real way to optimize your timer much more because you are sitting here behind these artificial barriers, is kind of annoying. I think that if they sped up just the travel time between platform to platform, that would actually be kind of good. There are a couple of these moments where you're getting picked up by the Valkyr, which actually kind of feel totally fine. Like the first couple after the first boss feel fine. The one that's after the second boss that takes, I don't know, a solid 30 to 45 seconds, which we're going to talk about here in a second with the checkpoint stuff as well, which is another minor infraction. But like the 30 to 45 second one where you're just getting picked up and then carried across really doesn't feel like it has, I don't know, there's something that it loses its novelty, and then it's like, this is just obnoxious. The same with the one after the third boss where you end up defeating the boss and then you get carried up to the top spire to be able to fight the final boss. Just the concept of waiting 30 seconds to be able to get carried all the way up to the top, I do understand from like a design perspective of like a fantasy of the dungeon, it should feel like that, but whenever you relate it to Mythic Plus, it really just doesn't feel that great. I will say, okay, so the last downside that I have, I will say, is actually a minor infraction for the Spires of Ascension. I don't think this is like too egregious. But it's that one of the checkpoints is on the bad side of one of these 30 to 45 second windows where you're going to be end up carried off by these angels. And I feel like the ride is just obnoxious for no real reason. Like that ride in particular, you're already going to be struggling to be able to get back with your group because of potentially the length of the run back. But then on top of that, you have to sit through what is 45 seconds worth of RP where you are effectively not able to do anything. It's not like you're like trolling and not releasing quick enough, or that you're taking your time like trying to get back. It's that you're literally just sitting there not in control of your character, waiting for yourself to be able to get parked on the next platform. And I think that after the second boss, if the checkpoint was post this like angel ride, that would be substantially more beneficial for the players. I do genuinely feel like that. So yeah, all in all, these were my thoughts on Spires of Ascension and why I ended up ranking it in the C tier. I do feel like this one was actually really close from being a C to a B, but I felt like the just raw difficulty of the trash really hampered it as a whole, and it just made the dungeon experience less enjoyable because of it. I want to hear your guys' thoughts on the matter, though. Like, is this something that was also present whenever you guys have tested this dungeon, though? Like, did you feel like the trash was overwhelmingly complicated for what the dungeon was, especially compared to other Shadowlands dungeons? I feel like this dungeon has by far the most complex trash out of any dungeon that I've seen. If I were to change anything in this dungeon, I think that the easiest thing that I absolutely could change is the checkpoint after the second boss. That could easily be fixed to where it updates after the platform. I think that would absolutely just be the quickest way to being able to deal with that. And then maybe just a couple adjustments on some of these dashing mobs. I think that is the quickest way of fixing something, because it's really obnoxious for your melee and your tank to have this one guy who's just zooming around inside of all of these trash packs. There's also like this big guard mob that has this rebellious fist cast that requires a double melee kick rotation on top of standing on top of other trash mobs that need kicking as well. I think if you moved him down from 2 melee kick rotation to 1 melee kick rotation, that would maybe look a little bit more reasonable for how some of this stuff and how some of these trash packs are going to fare without like a full fundamental rework of how this dungeon feels. I think those are the only real things that I could think about changing that wouldn't take just an insane amount of development time without like having to completely redo packs, maybe add or subtract some trash packs, because I don't feel like that's absolutely necessary, especially with how well designed and like fine-tuned the count is in this dungeon. That would be some of the stuff that I would be looking to change. In addition to that, maybe one of the things I'd be looking to change is like the last boss has these angels that also protect it, and basically the order that you have to go to be able to even do this correctly is left angel, then you go right angel, then you go middle angel. Like maybe if the debuff that had the increased damage taken dropped whenever your combat dropped, that would make everything a little bit more reasonable for you to be able to do these in different orders. But as it currently stands, the order you're not really in control of, which I don't love, but again, that's just a very minor thing in the dungeon. And that would just be like, if I had enough time to change like every little thing that I wanted to, that's maybe something that I would hit as well. So beyond that, that was my view of the dungeon Spires of Ascension, why I gave it a C tier. I want to hear down in the comment section, how have you guys felt about this dungeon as a whole? Have you guys played it on the beta at all? Did you guys feel the same as me? Did you guys feel a little bit different as me? Have you guys been enjoying the series? Is there anything else that you would like to see outside of this kind of content? Because once I end up finishing up with this dungeon series, I don't really have anything planned too far into the future, so this is just kind of my short-term plan. But beyond that, I hope you guys all have a great rest of your day, and I will see you guys in the video tomorrow.